Hi modelers, it's Chris the modeler at ABR Modelworks and welcome to designing module number 1 for ABR Lines vlog number 6. Now it's actually not the first module that I started on. The first module had a little step out section and we've got our train show coming up in a few weeks time and I don't have time to really get that module put together. So this is a slightly simpler module as far as the design, but as you'll see it's actually got a lot of detail on it. So before we get into the design side of things, our laser went down and it took me a couple of weeks to get in a new tube and actually do quite a bit of modifications to the laser to get it all up and running again. And during that time I thought, well, let's build ourselves a workbench to make it a lot easier working on the modules, because at the end of the day I'm going to have a lot of these display modules. And when I say at the end of the day, probably that day will go on forever, but nevertheless that's what we've done. We've built this nice workbench. It's got a light, and the idea of it is that we don't need to have the modules sitting on their legs. I can just place them next to each other and be able to lift them up, turn them around, do any wiring I want to do, all those sorts of little jobs that's a real pain getting underneath. So this makes the production of modules a lot faster and easier. At the same time, I'll have space underneath for some storage and some storage above, because that's one of the things that I'm very short on. So let's just spend a moment talking a little bit about what's going to happen. This is a 2.7 meter long display, and to help me do the design I've made these little strips that will be placeholders for the track. I've also started designing buildings and all of the other components that are going to go into this particular build. So over the next couple of weeks we'll start doing a few videos along the lines of how I've gone about doing all those sorts of things, including some tips that I've come up with for making the modules join together easier as far as the track side of things is concerned, and the wiring as well. So let's get into working out where the various parts are going to go. Now, as I've said in the past, this is a Fre-Mo based layout, which basically means it's modular and I can put a whole bunch of different modules together in various configurations to come up with a railway on that particular day or for that particular display. Now Fre-Mo is something that's done around the world and there are a few different standards, but they basically work on a simple standard that allows them to plug different modules together from different builders and set up these really large displays. This particular module is going to be a through track on a little town I'm going to call Big Rock Valley, and it'll essentially have a straight through line with a passing siding and an industry at one end of the layout and a goods handling facility at the other end of the layout, along with a station. There'll be a couple of flats as far as the building style is concerned, so they're just the fascia of the buildings, and then there'll be a roadway running along the railway line that'll come in closer to the line at this end, and here we'll have a series of buildings that will depict a little town and street scene. So let's start putting a little bit of track down and working out things like size, space, availability, etc. Okay, so let's start placing some of the track pieces down. Now I'm using code 83 Pico track, and that seems to be the standard around the world for most of the Fre-Mo systems. The little strips that I've made are going to serve two purposes. First of all, I'm going to use them just to give me an idea of where the track is going to go, etc. But I've made these so they slot into the center of the rail, so that way when I'm laying my track I can make sure I'm getting it nice and straight. And although this particular module is largely going to just be straight track, and some point in the future I'll probably make up the same thing for different radiuses so that I can get my curves nice and consistent, and I'll probably make up a set that will have the transition so that they start off at a more gradual radius as they blend into the radius we're actually going for. So if you're interested in these, reach out to us, and maybe we might turn this into a product as well. Alright, so let me start laying some of this down and we'll see what we end up with. I've also made some little spaces to help with aligning the various rails. Alright, let's get into it. Now, I already have a centre line because there's a rib running down the centre, so that will do for the sake of this exercise to give me a reference point to get my straight down nice and straight, as they say, in the right place. Now, of course, if I was doing this and going to be moving on to actually gluing down and putting the track and the ballast in place, I'd spend a little bit more time with a ruler or maybe even a jig that I might make up, especially to get this first straight, because this is what's called the datum line. That's the straight line that we're going to measure from. And so everything as far as the rail is concerned coming this way will be based off where this particular piece of track sits. Now additionally, and these are fairly rough at the moment, I've made myself a few little pieces for points to as placeholders. Now I'm starting the point 150 mil in from the end. As far as the joining is concerned, there'll be a 35 mil gap at either side, but we'll get into that when we start laying track. Now I want a little bit more space for this next section, so I'm going to come across at about 2.5 inches. Okay, so there we have our basic track configuration. The straight through line, the passing siding, another little sort of runaround siding, and two end spurs, one for each of the industry at that end and for the goods facility. So let me grab the camera and do a little bit of walk around to give you a bit of an idea. Okay, so we now have our mock-up of where the track is going to go, and we can see how much space we have for the other elements of this scene. Now what I've made is just quickly cut up some MDF to mock up the roadway, because I wanted to be able to see how much space I've got for the buildings, etc. So let me go ahead and lay down these pieces, and that'll give you an idea of what we have left over to play with. Okay. So you can now see our land area at the back here for our little township buildings, and how much space we've got for the industrial side of things, and then the station, etc. So now, as I did with the track, let me just do a quick flyover to give you a better idea of how much space there is available for the buildings and making up the scenery, etc. So there we go, modelers, we've made a start. We've worked out our space. We now need to look at making up the mock-up buildings. Now luckily I have already designed quite a few of these buildings, so it's not a great big job. It's something that I can quickly make the mock-ups in roughly a day or so, and then I can start finishing them to turn them into kits. So pretty much everything you see on this diorama will be available in kit form, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do so. That helps us out tremendously. Also, click on the little bell icon so you get notifications on new videos. And have a great day modelling. I'm Chris, the modeler at ABR Modelworks.